Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prose podcast, your go-to source for the art, the craft, and the business of publishing. I'm Tally Shamus, an agented writer and a literary intern.
And I'm Lauren Kahn, an author and literary agent. As former attorneys and book lovers, we're pulling back the curtain on an industry known for being opaque.
And today we are thrilled to welcome best-selling author Sunyi Dean onto our show. Sunyi is a multi-award losing author of speculative fiction. She was born in Texas, raised in Hong Kong, and now resides in Yorkshire. Her debut novel, The Book Eaters, was an instant #2 Sunday Times bestseller. In her spare time, she likes buying whiskey, collecting dumbbells, and dying in jiu-jitsu. She also founded the Hugo-nominated Publishing Rodeo podcast with fellow tour author Scott Drakeford. Her highly anticipated sophomore novel, The Girl with a Thousand Faces, will hit stores in May 2026. Sunyi, thank you so much for joining us. We're so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
The Girl with a Thousand Faces is releasing in May. We are all very excited. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about your book?
Yeah, so Girl with a Thousand Faces is my second published novel, and it's set kind of in Hong Kong. And it's kind of a story in two parts. So part of it follows Mercy Chan in 1975 Kowloon Walled City, where she's kind of working as this 53-year-old ghost talker. She deals with the ghosts of all these tormented people who are left over from post-war Hong Kong, and she works for one of the triads. And she has a little bit of a mysterious past and some other things going on in her life. And the second part of the story, they do intersect, I promise, is set about 30 years previous. It's set in kind of 1942 Hong Kong, right as the Japanese invasion is going on. And it follows a young girl and her mother who flee the city because they don't want to live under occupation. And they go out and they live on one of the ghost islands, the kind of rural islands in Hong Kong, Sai Kung region, because they think it'll be safer. And of course, the island is actually, the island they choose that no one wants to go to is haunted. All the villagers died in a storm years ago. And obviously this is a really good plan, and it goes excellently, and they just live on the island and hang out on the beach and everything's fine, and it's not at all dark and creepy. So it's just about ghosts and intergenerational trauma and this kind of one family in this story, and it spans a long period of time. And I keep being told by people that they don't see the plot twist coming, mostly because it involves like the book kind of changing genre midway through. So if you spot the plot twist, well done, let me know.
Yeah, well, I love it. I mean, first off, your writing is incredible. We're definitely going to talk about voice on this episode because you have got it for sure. But I would love to know how this book came about in terms of the idea, but also kind of, I don't want to say the magic system because it's not so much magic, but I mean, no spoilers, but in the beginning you have this one old woman's ghost and, you know, smoke spills from her nose. She's breathing fire. How did you come up with kind of the logistics of how this supernatural world would work?
So that was a little bit tricky because you want to kind of honor the mythology but also do your own thing with it. And I had conversations with my mother about it. Now she's very kind of old school Chinese, so you know, I'd say, well, does this thing have rules, and does this work like that? And she would say, well, of course not, it's fantasy, it's made up. And she just didn't understand why I couldn't just like invent whatever I wanted. And I was trying to explain to her, like, no, people on the internet will get mad at you if you don't do it in a certain way. And she just didn't get it. So a lot of the ghosts come from ghost stories. There are collections of ghost stories. It's a bit tricky because actually in modern day ghost stories are banned in China, which is a bit ironic. And this is because at least on paper, the Chinese Communist Party is secular, so they don't believe in promoting things that encourage superstition. So all their ghost literature is from the past, but there are a lot of ghost tales, and they come in all kinds of forms. They have all kinds of abilities. Some of them do breathe fire or vomit disease or have like needles for hair or necks that unwind like ribbons and all kinds of crazy things. And basically a ghost, it's a ghost there. It just is, it's almost like a word for a strange supernatural thing. It's just a word that incorporates the supernatural, and it doesn't quite mean ghost the way it does in the West, which is a very specific dead person. Because they are sometimes dead people, but then they're like, that's why like the word for Westerners, which is guai lo, which means ghost man in Cantonese, and that's the word they use for foreigners. And it just means basically you look like a strange person because you're really pale. So it doesn't actually like literally mean that they think that you're a ghost. They just think you look like weird, basically. Maybe weird, the weird with a Y-R-D spelling is a better word for ghost, or better translation of that term.
Wow, that's fascinating. And how does this compare, both in terms of subject matter and in terms of how it was writing it, to The Book Eaters, your first book?
It was pretty difficult to write, I think, because basically I came to my editor for book 2 with all these ideas I'd already had, and she said, "That's really great, but I think you should try something totally new. It's none of these. And just like push yourself and see what happens." And I'd never had to write a story without a clear sense of what it was from the beginning, which is why I think it took so long. I had to figure out what the story was and what it would be about. So it was a lot of drafting, a lot of research, a lot of reading, a lot of seeing like what interested me. I found I'm always drawn to like body swapping and kind of transhumanism. I found that side of it really interesting. I found the role of ghosts in terms of like Chinese feminism really interesting, because Chinese women historically had very limited lives, and for example, you couldn't have a love story about a woman who husband dies and she finds love again, right? Because if your husband died, you're a widow forever. That's it. But if you made her into a ghost, she can like seduce men and be really sexy and have lots of partners and lots of power, and she can kill people. So I love that ghost stories were a kind of empowering way to tell stories about women doing things that society didn't allow them to do. And I think that was kind of the start of it. Like, where does this go from here? And of course, I read stories about water ghosts. And you get a lot of stories like, oh, this guy went down to the lake, he saw something in the water, it dragged him to the water, drowned him, and swapped places with him, so his soul is now in the lake, and its soul is now in his body, and then it walks off. And because these are quite old stories, they never go into that. And you're just like, wait, what do you mean it walks off? So you just go home and be like, hi, I'm now Bob. Like, you never find out. And I was interested in what happens when ghosts do that, when they kind of move between bodies and move between lives. So
Yeah.
I love that unpacking, because I've never thought about ghosts in that way, ever. That's fascinating. But I would love to really take a step back. And you mentioned your agent. And on this show, a lot of our listeners are looking for agents. They're trying to set up that next phase of their career. So I would love to take a step back and hear about your journey to drafting your first book, to finding an agent. Was your debut the one that got you an agent? And really just unpack and get granular there.
yeah, that's fine. So the first book I wrote, I started writing in 2016 when kind of my life had really dead-ended, and I was having immigration problems. I couldn't work, we had no money and all this stuff. And I was just kind of like, okay, I've not really got anywhere with anything else. I'm going to try and write that thing that I thought was pointless because there's nothing left to lose. And I wrote my first book in 4 months, and it was like not fit for man or beast. It was really, really bad. I queried it. I think I had about 130 rejections from agents and small presses. No one liked it. I wrote a second book that I tried to put in like what I thought would be commercial in quotes. So I made it kind of like urban fantasy and a really sassy narrator and all this stuff. It did get me an agent, one offer, but it did not sell on submission. So that was book 2. Submissions, when your agent sends you out to publishers. And that took about 18 months of getting rejections trickling in. And I was just telling this to someone else recently, but I remember one of my rejections, like the publisher actually ghosted us. And in fact, they ghosted us so hard, they stopped responding to my agent's other submissions like forever. So like I've been rejected so hard that it got my agent rejected from an imprint.
Oh no.
I don't know if they ever responded to Naomi again, but anyway, after that, had that idea for Book Eaters for a while, and I sat down to write it, and there always seems to be turmoil when I'm writing books. So, I was married at the start of Book Eaters, writing about a single mother, and at the end of that novel, I was a single mother myself and separated, and I think I'd finally managed to move out about 2 months before we went on submission, before I finished that novel and went on submission. And at that point, it was a completely different experience. The book sold in about a week. It had a really, really high advance relative for most debuts, and it just changed my life overnight. So,
Wow. Congratulations, belated, but still, that's fantastic.
very
Yeah, no,
lucky.
that's incredible. And were you with the same agent this whole time?
I was, yeah, although we did part ways almost 2 years ago now, I think. They kind of dropped down to like almost part time for a while, and they had a lot of things going on in their lives, and also they live in Canada, and I live in the UK, and I think just a combination of like I was trying to speed up when they're slowing down, and I kind of wanted an agent who was a bit more local. My agent lives like an hour from me, so my current one. And also, I have all my author friends in the UK, like seven of them. That seven of the ones I know have Harry as an agent. So it just felt like a kind of natural step almost. But I do feel bad about it, but I still feel grateful to them. End of the day, it happens. It's pretty common. I think most people I know have changed agency at least once.
Yeah. I'm between agents at the moment, so that's why I'm always curious about these journeys that us authors go on in finding representation. Do you think what was the biggest difference that really made this, the Book Eaters stand out? Do you think those things that you thought about to make something more commercial, or what do you think it was that really made this the book for you?
Well, it's funny because I've tried to revive book two. Because when I was taking a long time on this next book, I said to Tora, well, do you want this book I've already written? And basically no one really liked it. I think they kind of, my current agent, Harry, he actually said, this is really difficult to market. It's not very commercial. So what I thought was commercial was not really, because I think maybe the author perspective on what sells is different from how it lands with readers or other people. I think Book Eaters, like looking back with the knowledge I have now, I think there are a few things that helped it. It's a book about books, which I've since found out, because our industry is controlled, decisions about your book are made by booksellers and salespeople. People who work in the industry like books about books. And I guess examples of that would be like Book of Doors by Gareth Brown, The Booksellers of Bath by Garth Nix, that's a book about books. Just yeah, even I suppose like Babel is almost a book about books. So I think that itself gives an edge. It makes booksellers more interested, and if they like the book, then they push it harder. So I think it was a combination of things. It was the right book for the right time, the right market. I thought the British setting would be a problem, but I keep being told by Americans that it just reads like a strange fantasy land. So I guess not.
You mentioned thinking that, that urban fantasy that you had written was commercial, but it turned out really not to be. So what elements of it do you think, as a writer, you thought, this can sell, and then it turned out that maybe the market felt different?
I thought it was high concept, but just because it's high concept doesn't mean it's a high concept that resonates. It was about basically it's about how some people have, in the daytime they're a normal person, at night they have a dream self who wakes up in the dream world. And the premise of the book is that the lady who lives in the dream world, she's really cool and she's badass and she fights shadow dream monsters and she has lots of friends. And the lady who lives in the real world is really depressed and lonely and tries to take her own life. So the book is about how the dream self has to save the real self, and it gets all very surreal and stuff. And I thought, okay, that's high concept, but turns out it's like really difficult to sell books about suicide and depression, and dream worlds in general apparently don't connect well with audiences. But they're also, I didn't know all this stuff. My agent told me later. They're also really common for writers who are starting out to write. I don't know why, it's just really interesting that that's something we settle on. So basically, it was like a very early career book in a lot of ways. It had all the classic hallmarks of early efforts. I guess.
It's so interesting that you bring that up, because we've seen this in the industry where quite often a book will start with a character waking up, or, the dreaded twist where it was all just a dream. And so I think that these kind of misuses of the trope have made it so that anyone cringes away from it. And Lauren, tell me if you agree, but I think that writers who are writing maybe, their third, fourth, fifth books can get away with it. Whereas debut writers, I think, have to be a lot more careful with what they write about.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I also just think there's a right way to use the trope. Like I always think back to people who say using a prologue. Don't use a prologue. Like a prologue's not the way to start the book. But maybe you're not using the prologue correctly. Maybe you really just actually don't need a prologue and the prologue should be chapter 1. But sometimes, like for example, I'm writing a thriller and I put in a prologue because I felt like chapter 1 was a little too light, a little too fun. And the prologue kind of sets the scene for something darker. It kind of hints at like a murder, a death, and then you go back to chapter 1. So I think you just have to use the tropes, or like you said, or prologue, or whatever it is. You have to figure out how to use it in the right way. And I think, the people that are just, the whole chapter was a dream. You don't want the reader to feel like an idiot. Like, oh, I just read about your dream. Like this doesn't even move the plot forward.
Yeah.
I think writing from a place of disdain is also really bad, and I think that was the main mistake I made. That I came into it like, oh, no one wants to buy my super smart literary fantasy novel. It's not that it's bad, it's just it's too smart for people, and so I'm going to write like a dumb book for like dumb people, and then they'll love it. And I did have that arrogance, which thankfully has been kicked the hell out of me since by lots of experience and rejection, and just like gradually realizing no, it was the book sucked so bad. And I think that shows, like when you come from this place of like, oh, I'm gonna write urban fantasy, a genre I hate, is not ever gonna be a good result. So I'm told by one of my ex-mentees, he writes horror, that he's getting loads of people in that genre now who are coming in like, well, I hate this genre, but I heard everyone's buying horror, so can everyone please teach me how to write it? And that goes down like a lead balloon on Jupiter in horror discourse. Because you've got to have respect and love for the genre that you're in. And I think I have realized that actually I like writing in a slightly different place. There's some urban fantasy elements in Book Eaters and in Girl with a Thousand Faces, but it's not like the main show.
Yeah, for sure. Well, you bring up your mentee. That's actually a great segue to talk about mentorship. So you and I are both Right Hive mentors. That's how I met Sunyi. So tell me a little bit about how you transfer what you've learned in your writing to your mentorship, and what are some of the main things maybe that you impart upon mentees?
So I think I'm a little bit... what I love about Right Hive is it allows mentors to be really flexible, because I've looked into some other programs and they tend to want you to kind of teach certain things in certain ways. That, and it's completely free, because I don't want to be in a program that charges people, just for me personally, because I've always benefited from other people's free advice. I don't feel like I'm a good person to teach writing. I think I found that even when I'm critiquing other people, unless I know them very well, that my critiques sort of amount to like, this is how I would have written it, which is not very helpful, because everyone's got their own style and their own voice. So when I pick up mentees, I tend to look for people who know how to write and who I think have a good voice, but they either they don't know enough about the industry, or there are some structural changes I can suggest that I think will make the book more commercial. So I look for people who have the drive and they want to write, but they need like help with the industry side, the pitching. And I think that's what I tend to try and teach people, because I would never change like Todd's voice or Jane's voice. I think the way they write is very them. But just, for example, the most recent round of mentees, I was looking at like, it's like a no magic political fantasy with these kind of violent cage fighting lesbians who are just like proper enemies to lovers, amazing dynamic. But it was I think she pitched it as like lesbian romance, and I was like, I nearly didn't read the submission because I didn't know it was fantasy. So things like that, where I'm trying to help people who I think have the bones. I know other mentors can actually focus more on like the craft side, but I'm not a very good craft teacher.
Gosh, there's so much to unpack there. I mean, just to go off what you finished with, the genre piece, know your genre. I think that is such a simple thing that if you want to stand out in an agent's inbox or in an editor's inbox, know your genre. Because I actually was reading a query yesterday where it started out, I think it said it was historical fiction. And as I'm getting further into the query, I was like, wait, this is fantasy. This is like magical realism. Like this is not, maybe it takes place in the past and there are historical elements, but this is very much not just historical fiction. So I think knowing your genre is huge. And I also love what you said about helping writers with the industry side. I think that sometimes is the hardest thing to grasp onto. And that's why we have this podcast. That's why I encourage authors to find other resources and other podcasts about publishing. I know you have or had a publishing podcast as well, because I think this industry side can be the most difficult for an author who really just wants to be alone with their notebook or alone with their laptop, and then to learn about the business of publishing. It can be very overwhelming.
Yeah, definitely. I think that was probably, in both cases, neither of them had a lot of community, and I think that makes such a difference. It's really difficult to find community because a lot of the ones that I used to be in online, forums have kind of died a death, really. And forums used to be where authors would find each other and connect and really learn. I learned to write query letters from Absolute Right forums, which is a bit of a dead zone these days. But I don't really know where people learn to write them now. I guess they just do their best.
I mean, there are different, Writer's Digest, other websites have set up some, resources. There's so many Substack blogs on it now too. And, there are podcasts, like I think The Shit No One Tells You About Writing does a great job of teaching query letters. And then I think I look to pub tips a lot on Reddit if listeners are familiar, and they have this ability where you can actually write in brackets Q crit and query critique, and then you can post your query letter and then people will comment on it and give you feedback on it, which I think is awesome.
Yeah, actually, that they are really good for query crits. I avoid Reddit a little bit because I think Scott and I were not very popular on Reddit, but the actual like query critique stuff is very, very good.
It's important. It's very helpful to have someone else in there. And I also, before we talk about another topic, I want to go back to what you said about voice. And I'm so curious, what is your definition of voice? Because I think when I talk to authors, they seem confused. They can't really figure out what voice is. So I'm just curious what your definition is.
I think it's a very complicated, multifaceted thing that we've given like a single word to, but it kind of encapsulates your personal view on life and how you express yourself and some of your personality. And it's all these facets, like the books you read growing up, the education you have, the way you've learned to talk, and personality as well. And I think just how you think about things, I suppose. So for example, one of my friends, Essa Hansen, is a very sensory person. So part of her voice is she has just like these incredible sensory descriptions that are just in all of her writing. And that's like a facet of her personality and also how she perceives the world around her.
I think, and I really don't say this lightly, but The Girl with a Thousand Faces, I truly think is a study in voice. I honestly, when you're reading the way that Mercy speaks, the way that she thinks, you see this character, you see this like older woman, the insults that she throws at people. They're so funny and so clever. And I think speaking with you on this podcast, I see where it comes from, because that kind of dry humor is very much, coming out now. But is that how you craft voice that captivates people? Because, you mentioned before you had the sassy FMC and you were thinking, oh, this is going to sell. And often people think that. But how do you truly capture that voice, especially in different characters, Because, like, I can see this, for example, for Mercy, but then you need to write a character who's completely different and has different life experience. So how do you inject that with a different type of voice that's still captivating?
I think there's probably lots of different ways. So I think when I was first writing, there used to be this author called P.N. Elrod. I think she's sort of known in urban fantasy spaces. And she used to run a service called Lobbing a Brick, which is you would submit 3,000 words to her for like $10 and she would tell you bluntly why you were not getting an agent, and like just like no holds barred. And and I remember I sent in a sample writing and she was like, there's nothing wrong with this sentence level, but nobody's going to buy your book because I don't give a fuck about your characters. They are so boring. You need to make me care about your characters. And I think after that, I started spinning. I read like The Emotional Craft of Fiction by Donald Mass to, what makes characters interesting, the way they think, because he believes that really successful novels have that in common, that you care about the characters and their arc. I remember doing personality tests. That was like a really interesting period, doing personality tests for my characters and discovering that one of my lead characters at the time had no personality. So like a conflict, what do they call them? Conflict management personality test, where you test how you handle conflict and you can answer it as your character. And I was like, oh right, my character doesn't handle anything. They're just totally avoidant. And things like that, or just particularly for that book, because I spent so long writing it and writing like probably 200,000 words that never got used. And a lot of that was this character's doing this character's doing that, this character in this story. And I think that informs it as well and helps. There's another old sci-fi author called Roger Zelazny who has said in interviews he writes scenes for his characters, which he never puts in books on purpose. And he does that so that, because he believes that when every character's on the page, they're carrying baggage from things they've experienced. And if he's written that, he knows the baggage they're carrying, and that this will inform their interactions and their reactions. And I think, I don't know, just anything you can do in that sense.
I think that's such a worthwhile exercise. And I kind of want to go back. You'd mentioned that you had this first agent and you were successful. You had sold Book Eaters. What did you take from that, both in terms of your writing craft and kind of how you were pitching? So going back to what you teach your mentees, how did that affect your second go around? How was querying the second time?
So querying the second time is really different when you've sold a book, because, and I found this because I have a lot of friends who've all left agents recently, probably 10 or more total. And I think the thing is, like, even if you're a mid-list or a small press author, you are still a safer bet for an agent than like a complete unknown. So they don't have to love your writing, they just have to like it enough to rep it. It is a lot easier. I think essentially it was me interviewing them. I didn't have a new book. I kind of went through and I narrowed it down to like three. Well, there were four agents that I was interested in, which is like, I think Zoe Plant, Juliet Mushins, Alex, and then Harry. Juliet Mushins ghosted me. She's too big for me. Zoe Plant was about to go on maternity leave, and I thought, okay, I'm not waiting 9 months. And then between the other two, I talked to them. We just had a long chat, and they were both happy to offer. So it was so different. It was more like you really are interviewing someone to be your employee, and not like scraping pitifully at the door of asking to be let in. So.
Yeah. To have the power dynamic switch like that is quite nice. And I was going to say too, DHH is a great agency. I actually had an offer of rep there, and I ended up not taking it because it was in the UK and I'm in the US, and I just was hoping to be a little closer. But I've since left my agent, so I am thinking of reaching back out with my new manuscript, because I did really like the agent, and I thought the agency was fantastic.
Oh yeah, you should go for it. I mean, the only thing that will be an issue, which you'll know as if you're an agent as well, is that your US deals will basically have to pay 20%.
Yeah.
Although even some of that is flexible.
Well, so Lauren and I are also both attorneys, so we do, have quite a bit of experience with the legal side. And so I think actually for any listeners who are writing, who are considering agencies in different jurisdictions around the world, I think you can negotiate with your agency to set your domestic jurisdiction as elsewhere. Like, for example, if you're, let's say, in Canada, you can set your domestic jurisdiction to the US, but then anything that you sell in Canada, you're going to have to pay that higher commission on. So just also, I think it's really important for writers to know that they can negotiate their agreements with their agents. A lot of the time, as Lauren mentioned, there's this power dynamic. And, writers think, my goodness, I'm getting attention from agents. This is a miracle. I have to do whatever they want or else they're not going to sign with me. But the thing is, if they like your writing, then you've got something there that they want, and you do have a little bit of power, even if it is still imbalanced. So, review all your agreements carefully, make sure you understand what you're signing. And I always suggest that people get independent legal advice. It can be pricey, but there are, pro bono legal clinics. There are lawyers who will offer free consultations. And so I think that, I love this point. It's just great that authors should always know their rights legally.
Yeah, and I think different ones work differently. So my first agent, she just would pitch the UK herself, so everything was 15%, which is why when I went to Harry, I was like, if you don't need a co-agent, because he usually works with a co-agent in the States. UK agents are less connected to America. I said, if you don't need a co-agent, we can just do 15%. And he agreed to that. I do think, yeah, contracts are interesting. Because, I don't know, are you in, there's like a Discord to help some of the 2026 debuts. And some of us are coming in to talk to them. And they were all telling us that a lot of agencies are changing their contracts for people who leave agencies. So, for example, this lady showed me she'd collected like 30 different agency contracts that she'd seen, and a lot of them now have this clause which essentially say, if you part ways with this agency, they own all of your subsidiary rights forever until the end of copyright. And I was like, that's not what I had when I left my agency. Yeah. I took my unsold foreign and subsidiary rights. Obviously, sold ones are lost. But it seems like that's a bit more of a common practice. If you have any leverage at all, I have to say I would not want to sign that, because that's really harsh. Just for people who don't know, like if you sell your book to America and then you've got lots of foreign rights, like France or Germany or Brazil or wherever, and those haven't sold yet, and you part ways with your agency, it used to be you took those with you, and your new agency would be able to sell them. But yeah, sounds like that's changing, not in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, every agency has a different agreement. I think that's why it's so important to get copies of those early on in that offer period, and make sure you're considering them. And like Tali said, try to negotiate. I mean, sometimes these agencies are just like, this is our template, we don't change it. But maybe that's not the agency for you, and I think it's always just worth a shot. I always say to my authors, I'm going to try my best, and I'm going to speak to management, and we're going to see what we can do, because I don't want the agency agreement to be the reason we're not working together. So yeah, I think it's, it's a delicate thing, but I think authors need to understand that when they start getting offers of representation, they're in the power seat now. And this is their career. And I think you need to grasp that and not let yourself just be run over.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Sunyi, getting back to your writing, I want to dig into the mentorship program a little bit more, because I think that they're so valuable, especially mentorship programs like Right Hive, like Roundtable, that really focus on mentees from marginalized groups. I know you mentioned that you look for strong writing, but do you look for anything in mentees in terms of like, how can I help elevate these people? Like, maybe they've written in their application, I don't have a community. One of my mentees actually, for Roundtable, is in a remote village in Kenya. And that really drew me to her, because I thought, okay, well, she does not have a big city near her. She doesn't have the resources that other people may have. Is that something that you consider as well?
It is, yeah. And actually, for the first time around, I felt actually really guilty about choosing Todd, because like, I love him to bits, but basically, he's a white British guy. And I was kind of like, am I really going to pick a white British guy for my mentee? But I did anyway, because I just love the writing that much. The second time around, I think there were like 2 or 3 people that I was really, really like thinking about a lot and in tight contention with. And in the end, one of the reasons why I did feel really drawn to Jane's work is because she's a lesbian woman writing lesbian romance. And I think that's actually fairly underrepresented, especially in dark fantasy romance. There's a lot of like sapphic literature written by kind of either men or I guess like me, straight passing sapphics, but there's not that much written by like lesbian authors. That they are a little bit underrepresented, and there's a difference in how they write their queerness because it's so varied. Everyone is queer in different ways. Everyone is queer in different ways. And I think that side of it and how important it was, the queer normative society that she'd written, and just the way that she'd like built all the family structures and everything, I was kind of thinking, I feel like this deserves a shot. I feel like it deserves to be seen. Like there could be a little bit more diversity in that sense for that particular genre.
And For people who are interested in this mentorship program, is it something actively taking applications? I guess, Tali, you could tell us as well.
Yeah, so we just started around, right? Just a month ago or so, a couple of months ago at this point. So yeah, it won't be open for applications until I believe they start in the fall, right? But
Yes, usually fall.
yeah,
Okay,
but
awesome.
it's always great to get to know the organizations, like it's really important to find that community, and I think that these mentorship programs are a fantastic way to do that. There's a Discord though that I think people can join at any time, right? I'm fairly certain.
I think so. I think there's like a bigger Discord for actual applicants, which I think I looked in once and then ran away. I didn't want to scare
Yeah.
anyone.
Yeah,
Yeah.
these programs, I mean, I've said it before on this podcast about these mentorship programs. I see that you completed a mentorship program in your query letter, and I automatically give it a closer look because I know you've worked with someone. I mean, there are people who, frankly, don't even get beta readers and query, and it's extremely obvious. So if you can tell me, not only did I have beta readers, but my beta reader, is a published author, or someone who is going to be potentially a published author, someone who is a mentor in this field, that makes a difference. Like, it does really make me take a closer look. So I think joining these things, it also it kind of gives you a little bit more control over your career, to put yourself into these application cycles, to enter contests. I entered a few contests this week, and I just felt like, I don't know, I felt like I had more control than just sometimes when you send a query into the abyss and you're like, I don't even know if this will be read. So I think, making a list, there's so many lists of all these different programs. I think finding them, making a list, and trying to get yourself involved, I think is really important.
Yeah, definitely. Speaking of lists, actually, I want to go back to something that Sunyi, you had mentioned on your podcast back when it was, I think this was actually the latest episode you had. Maybe it was around the fall. And you were talking about gathering data on your debut and using that for your sophomore novel. So, how is that going for you? Have you gathered data? Have you used that to inform kind of your marketing plan or your publicity plan going forward? Where are you at with that now?
I do track it, and actually, my tour editor was really, really generous in giving information that she has as well. I mean, my read on it is it will be a quieter book. I think partly because the debut buzz is gone. I think because it's not a book about books, so it's not like an easy sell to booksellers and librarians. When they run Goodreads giveaways, I was like, okay, so it gets like 10,000 less applicants than the last one. It's a lot quieter in NetGalley. Oh, and pre-orders are lower, I think, by a fair bit. However, the actual print run is slightly higher than last time, so it feels it's a bit weird. It's like there's less buzz, but there's like more of an assumption that it will probably sell anyway. But in general, yeah, I can tell it's a bit quieter. I can tell that it was a little bit of a toss up for Harper, where they're trying to evaluate like, have you slid into mid list yet, or are you still like a big title for us? And I think they're undecided. We did get ARCs, but I'm aware that the book didn't get to like a Lumicrate or a big subscription like that, so it will have an impact on how it launches. But I think they're mostly making, especially in the USA side, they're making all the right noises and all the right movements, and they're trying with it, and I do appreciate that effort. But I think I won't really know until it kind of lands how it does. There's just so many factors that influence all these things, little whims here and there.
Do you feel different this time around? Like, how are you feeling? I know this is kind of an intense period, those couple months prior to publication.
It's hard not to feel like everything's riding on the next book. I mean, I think Book Eaters did well enough that I can basically afford for this one to flatline if it does. But I think, already I'm feeling the pressure for book 3, which I'm writing and I'm handing in the middle of March. So I think there's a sense that, like, I don't want to have a career where sometimes you see authors on Goodreads and you look and you can see all their releases in a row and every book has got fewer ratings than the last, and I don't want that to happen. But I also don't really know how to stop it. So
I saw on your website that you have, a release listed, no title, but release listed like every 2 years or so from now. Are those all books that are already in the works or that you have options for, or how does that work?
Oh, I'm just guessing. I think the next one, I mean, I'm hoping it'll be, what year are we in? We're in 2026. I don't think it'll be in for 2027 unless it's very late, which I wouldn't want because nobody wants that horrible November release date. But I think probably 2028 is a good bet, unless
Okay.
something goes drastically wrong or they just hate it when I hand it in.
So this is all with the same publisher?
Same, yeah, it's all part of the same contract. So it's 3 book
Wow.
contract.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I think I'm very lucky to have it be 3 books and 3 standalones. That said, if it was 2 books, I'd be renegotiating a new contract, which would be slightly better financially, but it's fine.
Yeah. How did you make that decision? Because I know we hear about, writers getting offered an option book and thinking, okay, do I take this knowing it's a safe bet, or do I potentially go back out and see if I can get a better deal? How was that kind of logic in your
Well,
mind?
I'm not on a new one yet, but I think when it comes time to do that, I think my agent thinks that there's a lot of value in staying where you have friends, basically, and I think that's probably true. I'm not sure that I'm a good fit for other houses. I think the kind of books I write are pretty suited to Tor, really, because they're just a bit all over the map, and that's kind of Tor's thing. I would have to see. I mean, like if I were recontracting tomorrow, I would be kind of looking at Harper going, I feel like everything you put out is romantasy, and I just do not write in that space. They don't really do a lot of sci-fi, so that's a consideration, but you just decide at the time, I guess.
Right. Yeah.
Well, if you have any books that you would like to recommend, we usually like to talk about that towards the end of the show, like any authors that you're excited for, or any books that maybe you've read an arc that are coming out this year.
Yeah, it's not going to be out for a while, but I've read like two arcs recently. They're really different. I both like them. So one was Infinite State by Richard Swan, which I think is out in July, and that's like a science fiction novel, and it's about a woman who lives in a kind of space empire dictatorship who tries to found a democracy. And it's not just like a kind of Star Wars rebels against the empire thing. It's about like the nitty gritty of founding like a democracy. How do you choose the laws? How do you decide on ethics? How does your society work? Like the literal nuts and bolts of building a nation. And that side really appeals to the nerd in me. And I think it's also kind of a bit of a resistance book, And then the other one I've read is actually the new Hannah Kaner book, which is A Snake Among Swans, and it was so different from God Killer. Like, they're both good books, but if you've ever read Trader Baru Cormoran, it's got kind of shades of that. It's like a woman who marries the warlord who conquered her people because she's trying to like save her people, and that means undermining him from the inside, but then she's just getting deeper and deeper into it and committing more and more crimes, and like, is she a hero or is she a villain kind of thing. And it's a lot of fun, and it's really dark and sad and morally grey and really interesting.
Wow. Those sound great. I love that. Yeah. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. This has been absolutely incredible. I think that we've shared so much great information that our listeners will really appreciate. Thank you for your
Yeah,
time.
thank you so much.
And thank you all so much for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and remember to check back next Tuesday for a new episode of the Pros podcast.